Hey, somebody want to tell me what that patch is supposed to be? Because I genuinely cannot tell if it's a unit insignia or a piece of fabric that got left in a dryer for 30 years. The laughter that followed was not mean-spirited in the way that cruelty is mean-spirited. It was the reflexive, performance-adjacent laughter of young men who are very good at something and have recently been reminded of that fact and are in the specific mood that produces. Sergeant First Class Devin Pritchard stood at the center of it, with his arms crossed and his chin raised at the angle of a man who has just said the thing everyone was already thinking and is taking appropriate credit. He was 32 years old, Ranger Regiment. 3 deployments behind him and a 4th authorizing, with the particular density of someone who has been in top physical condition for so long it has become structural. Behind him, a loose semicircle of Rangers from 2nd Battalion, 75th Regiment, leaned against the wall of the Ranger Orientation Program Welcome Center at Fort Moore, Georgia, in the easy posture of men who are very far from their limit. The old man standing near the entrance did not react. He was there for the Open Family Day event, one of several dozen civilians in the building, most of them younger than him by 4 decades, and he had drifted toward the wall near the trophy case the way people drift toward walls in rooms full of strangers, finding the edge, taking up a minimum of space. His name was Chester Ray Bodine, and he was 82 years old. He wore dark civilian trousers, leather shoes that had been polished but were genuinely old, and a plain khaki jacket, the kind with the chest pockets, over a button-down shirt. On the left breast of the jacket, sewn directly into the fabric with the careful hand stitching of someone who had done it themselves, was a patch. It was approximately 3 inches across. It had once been a bright design of some kind, the colors still present, but faded to a soft, washed-out palette by years in handling, the embroidery worn at the edges, the patch itself slightly misshapen the way fabric becomes when it has lived a long time close to a body. Chester Ray Bodine's hands rested at his sides. They were large and gnarled and liver-spotted, but they lay perfectly still, with a settled quality of hands that have done what they were asked to do and no longer have anything to prove. His eyes, when he finally turned them toward Pritchard, were pale blue, the color of a winter sky just after the clouds break, carrying within them a depth that made the air around them seem shallow by comparison. He said nothing. Pritchard, encouraged by the silence and the audience behind him, uncrossed his arms and stepped closer. He had the momentum now, the particular forward lean of a performance that has found its footing. "I'm serious. I'm not trying to be disrespectful," he said, in the tone of a man who is absolutely trying to be disrespectful and is using the disclaimer as a license to continue. "I just genuinely want to know what unit that's from, because I don't recognize it, and I know my patches." "Is that?" He leaned in slightly, narrowing his eyes in an exaggerated display of examination. "Is that a Ranger scroll under all that? Because if it is, that thing has seen better days. That is a dishonored patch, old-timer. That patch has given up." He turned back to his audience. "Somebody get this man a new one." More laughter. Chester Ray Bodine looked at the patch. He looked at it the way a man looks at something that contains more history than the person in front of him is capable of accounting for. And the look was not sad and was not proud, but was simply the look of a man confirming that a thing is still there. Then he looked back at Pritchard. "It's a 75th Infantry patch," he said. His voice was a low, unhurried sound, like water running over flat stone. "Before your scroll." Pritchard blinked. "Before the 75th Infantry, Ranger unit, Vietnam era. We didn't have scrolls yet." Chester Bodine looked at the patch again with the same quiet attention. This one came off a man named Elroy Stubbs. He was 20 years old. He gave it to me in 1969 after an action near Dak To. He didn't need it anymore. room went slightly quieter. Not all the way quiet. There were still other conversations happening at other ends of the building, other families, other rangers. But in this particular corner, the quality of the air changed, thickened slightly. The way air changes when something real has entered a space that is mostly contained performance. Pritchard's jaw worked for a moment. Then the performance reasserted itself, because momentum is its own kind of gravity. "Okay," he said. "So it's a Vietnam-era unit patch. From a unit that no longer exists, worn on a jacket that looks like it came from a surplus store, by a civilian who," he looked Chester Bodine up and down with deliberate, theatrical assessment, "who I genuinely cannot place in any military context. No offense." He turned half away, signaling to his audience that the exchange was concluding. The verdict delivered. "I'm sure you've got stories, old-timer." Chester. Ray Bodine said nothing. He looked at the patch again with the brief, private attention of a man confirming that something is still intact, and then he looked out at the middle distance, and the welcome center dissolved. The smell of coffee and industrial carpet in Georgia summer outside the windows vanished, replaced by the particular smell of the highland jungle at night, wet rot and red clay, and the copper smell of fear that is indistinguishable, at close range, from the copper smell of blood. The heat was not Georgia heat. It was the other kind, the kind that does not lift at night, and has no mercy in it. He was 23 years old. Chester Bodine, in the year 1969, was lean and dark and 3 months into his second tour in Sec Corps, and he was lying in the grass on the edge of a ridgeline 11 kilometers northeast of Dak To, with his element of 5 men strung out behind him in the dark. Listening, the LARP teams operated without the comfort of conventional support. No artillery on call, no armor, no reinforcements that could reach them before the situation resolved itself one way or another. What they had was patience and fieldcraft and the ability to see in conditions that made seeing very difficult, and each other. Elroy Stubbs was on his right. Elroy was 20 years old and from a small town in Mississippi, and had an irreverence about everything except the mission itself, which he took with the focused seriousness of someone who had understood early that the mission was the thing between him and not going home. He had a way of reading terrain that Chester had never been able to fully explain. An instinctive sense of where the ground wanted to put you versus where you needed to be that had saved the element twice in the weeks since Chester had come back in country. That night on the ridgeline, Elroy was the one who heard it first. The action lasted 4 minutes. Chester did not count the minutes during them. There was no time for counting during. But afterward, when the ridgeline was quiet again and the sound of the jungle came back in with the tentative quality of something returning to a place where something bad has happened, he counted 4 minutes. That was how long it took. Elroy Stubbs was the only man they lost. Chester carried him. He carried him 2 kilometers to the extraction point in the dark, because the option of not carrying him was not something he was capable of selecting. At the extraction, a medic tried to take the body, and Chester did not let go until the medic said his name twice. When he finally stepped back, Elroy's patch had come loose and was in Chester's hand, still pinned to the cloth that had been torn from, the fabric ragged at the edges, the embroidery bright in the way things are bright before time works on them. He had kept it since. He had stitched it to every jacket he had owned for 54 years. Not as a memorial, exactly, or not only. As an understanding, as a reminder that the thing he was wearing had been worn by a 20-year-old who was better at seeing in the dark than most men ever become, and who had not come home, and whose gift to Chester Bodine was the standard Chester had tried to live up to every day since. The welcome center came back. The carpet smell, the coffee, the Georgia afternoon outside. Chester Bodine blinked once. Pritchard turned fully away. Then he turned back. The performance had one more beat in it, and he had not decided not to deliver it. "Actually," he said, stepping back to close the distance, "I want to come back to this." He reached out and put 2 fingers against the patch, not pressing hard, but making contact. The way a man touches something he's decided to dismiss. "Because this is a public event and we've got families in here, and I want to make sure everyone understands." His voice carried now, aimed at the room. The difference between the men who are actually doing this work and the gentlemen who come to Family Day to relive the glory days. Because I think that distinction matters, and I think. The trophy case was 5 feet away, and Corporal Ana Reyes had been standing next to it for the last 4 minutes, holding a bottle of water she had stopped drinking from the moment Pritchard started talking. She was 23 years old, 11 months in the regiment, and she had a quality of stillness that the officers who evaluated her noted consistently in their assessments, an ability to watch without advertising the watching. She watched now. She watched Pritchard's fingers on the patch. She watched Chester Bodine's face, which had not changed. She watched the hands at the old man's sides, which had not moved. She thought about her grandfather, who had died when she was 14 and whose hands had looked like that. And she thought about the patch on the jacket, the misshapen, faded, hand-stitched patch, and something about the precision of that stitching, the care with which it had been attached, as if the thing it was holding deserved to be held carefully, pressed down on the part of her that could not let wrong things continue. She said, "Sergeant Pritchard." Her voice was quiet. "I need to verify the sign-in roster at the welcome desk. I could use your help." Pritchard glanced at her. "In a minute, Reyes. It's a time-sensitive thing, Sergeant. The CO wanted it confirmed before 1400. A pause. "I'll only need a minute." Something in her voice, not what it said but what it chose not to say, pulled Pritchard's eyes to her face, and whatever he found there made a small recalibration happen in the machinery behind his expression. He looked back at Chester Bodine. Then he removed his fingers from the patch. "We're done here anyway," he said to his audience, and to himself in equal measure. He moved toward the welcome desk. Reyes waited until his back was turned. Then she slipped out the side door and pulled out her phone and scrolled to a number she had saved 3 months ago after a regimental briefing. The direct line for the Ranger Training Brigade's Command Sergeant Major, who had given it to every corporal in the regiment's junior NCO program and told them to use it when they saw something that needed to be seen by someone above their pay grade. She had not used it until now. The phone rang twice. "Carver, Command Sergeant Major, this is Corporal Reyes, 2nd Battalion. I'm at the Orientation Program Welcome Center, Family Day event. There's a situation that I think you need to know about, sir." She paused. "There's a civilian here, an older gentleman. Sergeant Pritchard he's been making comments about the man's uniform patch, sir, in front of Junior Enlisted. The man's name is Chester Bodine. Chester Ray Bodine." The silence on the other end of the line was sudden and total. It lasted long enough that Reyes checked her signal. The signal was full. When Command Sergeant Major Carver's voice returned, it was a different voice, the same register, the same tone, but with everything ambient stripped out of it, reduced to its essential moving parts. "Spell the last name." She spelled it. 4 seconds of silence. "Reyes, is he still in the building?" "Yes, sir, near the trophy case. Do not let him leave. Do you understand me? You go back in there and you do not let Chester Ray Bodine walk out of that building. You don't need to explain anything to him. Just keep him there." "Yes, sir." And Reyes. A pause. "Don't tell Pritchard you called." The line went dead. At the regimental headquarters, building 200 meters across the post, Command Sergeant Major Theodore Carver was already out of his chair and moving with the particular velocity of a man who has processed information and arrived at action without stopping at deliberation. He went down the hall and knocked twice on the door marked Commanding Officer, Ranger Training Brigade, and opened it without waiting. Colonel Marcus Webb looked up from his desk. Carver said 4 words. Webb was on his feet before the sentence had completed itself. He looked at Carver. He looked at the door. He said, with the flat certainty of a man who has learned to trust exactly one source of information without question, "Get me Hargrove." General Hargrove's office was at Fort Liberty. The call took 45 seconds. The general was in a readiness assessment with his G3 staff when his aide came in and bent down and said something at a volume calibrated for one set of ears. The room watched the general's face. What they saw there made several of them straighten involuntarily. The way you straighten when you understand that the temperature of a room has changed and you are not certain why. General Hargrove said to his aide, "Get me a vehicle and 4 men in dress uniform. We're going to Fort Moore." He looked at his G3. "We'll finish this at 1600. He was putting on his cover before the G3 could acknowledge. Back in the Welcome Center, Chester Ray Bodine had returned to his position near the trophy case. He had a cup of coffee now. Someone had pressed it into his hands, one of the catering volunteers, and he had accepted it with the brief, genuine courtesy of a man who does not need things, but is not too proud to receive them. He stood and drank the coffee and looked at the trophies in the case with the same unhurried attention he gave everything. Reyes stood near the entrance, trying to look like someone who was not standing near the entrance for a reason. Pritchard had drifted back toward his group. The room had resumed its ordinary family day texture. Children at the display tables, families taking photographs, the low, continuous noise of 100 conversations. Chester Bodine caught Reyes's eye across the room. He looked at her for a moment with those pale blue eyes. He gave a small nod, not of thanks, not of acknowledgement of anything specific, but of the kind of recognition that passes between people who understand that certain things do not need to be spoken. She nodded back. She wasn't entirely sure he knew why she had made the call, but she was entirely sure he knew she had made one. 22 minutes later, the sound came. Not sirens. This was not the dramatic arrival of vehicles with lights. What came first was the particular sound of boots on pavement with intention. The specific rhythm of men who move as a unit because they have trained the individuality out of the act of walking. Then the entrance doors of the Welcome Center opened, and 2 soldiers in immaculate dress greens took up positions on either side of the doorway, with the practiced economy of men performing a function they have done before. Then Colonel Webb. Then Command Sergeant Major Carver. And then, filling the entrance with a stillness that was louder than anything that had been said in the room all afternoon, General Daniel Hargrove. 4 stars, dress greens with the particular density of ribbons that constitute a complete military biography in compressed form. He was 61 years old and had the face of a man who has been in consequential places and has made peace with what he saw there. Not hardened, exactly, but settled, the way good stone is settled. He did not look at Pritchard. He did not look at the junior rangers or the families or the catering tables or any of the normal components of the room. His eyes found Chester Ray Bodine at the trophy case in the time it takes to draw a breath and moved directly toward him. The room did not go quiet all at once. It went quiet in a ripple, the people nearest the entrance first, then spreading outward as the quality of what was happening in the room communicated itself without words, the way temperature communicates itself, until the 100 conversations had become 20, and then 5, and then none. General Hargrove stopped in front of Chester Ray Bodine. He looked at the patch on the jacket. He looked at it the way a man looks at something that he has heard described but has never seen, and finding that the description was accurate. Then he reached up to his left sleeve. He turned the cuff. He rolled it back twice, slowly, deliberately, until his forearm was bare. On the inside of his left forearm, faded to a soft blue-green by more than 40 years, was a tattoo. Small, precise, the design was a tab, a curved arc of text so weathered it required knowing what it said to read it. Rangers, and below it, inside the arc, a number. 75. He held the forearm up so the room could see it. So Chester Bodine could see it. "I got this in 1983, he said. His voice was not loud. It carried perfectly. I was 20 years old. There was a master sergeant in the regiment who took one look at me and told me I would never last the course. He was wrong, but he was not wrong about much else, and everything I learned about reading terrain and reading men, I learned from people who earned the right to teach it the hard way." He lowered his arm. He looked at the patch on Chester Bodine's jacket. The 75th Infantry was the unit this regiment descended from. The men who wore that patch wrote the doctrine that every ranger in this room was trained on, every ambush pattern, every patrol technique, every principle of small unit leadership that we call ours. It came from men who were in triple canopy jungle in the dark, with no GPs and no drones and no medevac on call, and they did it right anyway, because they had no choice but to do it right. He paused. His eyes moved to Pritchard, who had gone the color of old chalk. "Every patch starts out bright," the general said. "Quietly, time fades it. What doesn't fade is what it cost." The silence in the welcome center was absolute. Then General Hargrove reached up and took the patch from his own sleeve, the one he had been rolling back, and held it out to Chester Ray Bodine. "I'd like you to have this," he said, "if you'll take it." Chester Bodine looked at the offered patch for a moment. Then he looked up at the general. "I'll take it," he said, "if you'll take a cup of coffee with me first." Something moved in Hargrove's face that was not quite a smile but was the country that borders it. "I can do that," he said. They walked together toward the catering table, the old man in the faded jacket and the four-star general, and the room gave them the entire width of the space to do it. And nobody said anything at all. The formal record, Sergeant First Class Devin Pritchard, received a letter of counseling for conduct unbecoming the regiment's professional standards and was assigned to a mandatory senior mentorship program to be completed before his next promotion review. The letter used measured language. The regiment does not have to say more than it says. Then, before the general and Chester Bodine had finished their coffee, Pritchard walked across the room. He moved without his audience, without the lean and the raised chin, without any of the architecture that made him what he was in a crowd. He stopped beside the old man and stood for a moment, and whatever it cost him was visible in the quality of the standing. "Mr. Bodine," he said, "I said some things in this room today that I am ashamed of. I dismissed something I didn't understand, and I did it in public, and I did it at your expense." He stopped. "I'm sorry, sir." Chester Ray Bodine set down his coffee. He looked at Pritchard with those pale blue winter sky eyes for a long moment, not judging, not forgiving in any theatrical sense, simply looking. The way a man looks when he is deciding whether the person in front of him is saying a thing they mean. He appeared to conclude that the answer was yes. He reached up and placed a hand on Pritchard's shoulder. "You've got the fire," he said. His voice was the same low, unhurried sound. "The regiment made you sharp and hard, and I can see it. That's not nothing. That's what kept men alive." He paused. "Just remember, the patch started bright. Everything valuable does. Time is what shows you whether the value was real. He removed his hand. Take care of your men, son. He picked up his coffee. He turned back toward the general. Pritchard stood where he was for a moment, with the old man's words still in the air around him, and then he walked back across the room and found a quiet corner of it, and stood there, thinking about the word started. 11 weeks later, on a cold Saturday in January, Pritchard was at a hardware store on Victory Drive in Columbus, Georgia, buying weather stripping, when he saw Chester Bodine in the lumber section, looking at dowel rods with the same careful attention he brought to everything. He looked smaller in a flannel shirt and civilian trousers, or perhaps the room was just bigger than the Welcome Center had been. He looked like nobody. He looked like an old man who needed dowel rods. Pritchard put down the weather stripping and walked over. Chester Bodine heard him coming. He turned before Pritchard spoke, with that quality of awareness that does not announce itself. "Sergeant," he said. "Devon," Pritchard said. "If that's all right." Chester Bodine looked at him for a moment. Then he handed him a dowel rod. "Hold this even," he said. "I need to check the straightness." He turned it slowly in Pritchard's hands, sighting down its length with one eye closed. "Good," he said. He took it back and placed it in his basket. "Walk with me." They moved through the store together, the younger man and the older one, in the easy quiet of people who no longer need to establish anything about themselves in each other's presence, and whatever passed between them in the lumber and the hardware aisles was theirs. Chester Bodine paid for his dowels and walked to his truck in the January cold without looking back, unhurried and complete, moving through the ordinary Saturday morning of his ordinary life, a life that had been, at its center, extraordinary, and that he had never once asked anyone to acknowledge, because the acknowledgement was never the point. It never is, with the ones who actually earned it. If you were moved by Chester's story of quiet courage and timeless wisdom, hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to see it. And be sure to subscribe to Veterans Valor for more stories of America's unassuming heroes.